There you go.
All right. Well, welcome to the Ramsey County Board Workshop. Today's workshop topic is the American Rescue Plan update. Just a reminder that this board workshop is recorded and it is live streamed on a Zoom webinar. There will be no votes taken during the workshop. So let's start with the introduction of the commissioners and presenters around the table, and then we'll open it up to the rest of the room.
Rafael Ortega, Ramsey County Commissioner, District 5.
Maitan Zhang, Commissioner of District 6.
Kelly Miller, Commissioner of District 7.
Dana DeMaster, Director of Health and Wellness Innovation and Strategy.
Alex Kutzad, Interim Deputy County Manager for Health and Wellness.
Lynn Becker, County Manager. Rita Moran, County Commissioner, District 4.
And Tara Jevin Singh, County Commissioner for District 1.
Karen Francois, I'm the Deputy County Manager for the Information and Public Records Service Teams.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Bernard. I'm a Senior Policy Analyst with Policy and Planning.
Larry Zimmerman, Policy and Planning.
Hi, Dave Zaffron, Policy and Planning.
Patrice O'Neill, Workforce Solutions Director. Christy Cobbs, Planning Specialist with Workforce Solutions.
Tracy Main, Chief Clerk.
Rachel Molinar, Planning Manager, County Manager's Office.
Hi, Kim Hansen, Planning and Evaluation Analyst in Finance, and have been with Purpose in 2021.
Good morning, Katie Molinaire, Deputy Director in Social Services, leading Aging and Disability Services and Mid-Choices.
My name is Veronica, Chief of Staff.
I'm sorry, I'm just here to check questions.
Excellent. Welcome. Well, good morning, and I am happy to be here today to lead the first in a series of 4 workshops on the Ramsey County investment of the American Rescue Plan Act dollars, or the ARPA dollars. So this is the first of an introduction of a number of workshops. The American Rescue Plan Act provided $1.9 trillion in federal funds to address immediate community needs associated with COVID-19 and the resulting economic impacts. The goal of these investments went beyond the immediate needs and invested into communities to let them focus over multiple years on recovery and resilience-centered programs. Today, during the first workshop, the county manager and her team will provide information on the background of COVID-19 response and relief programs, how we spent the dollars, and what we learned through the process. Upcoming workshops this afternoon and next Tuesday will present more in-depth information about specific programs and services and their impact. I thank everyone for being here today, and I will pass this on to County Manager Becker.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Honored to talk a little bit about this very significant investment of dollars that the county made. Want to just so today presenting with me will be Dana, and she'll be focusing on, we'll start with Alex as the Deputy County Manager here, talking about the state and local recovery fund, and then we'll switch to Director DeMaster talking about bridging CARES learnings and also centering community and some of our one-time spending that we did, and then I'll just kind of briefly cover what's coming next for you. So the goal today is to really dive into the background and an overview kind of on a high level of the Ramsey County ARPA investments. I know especially for our new commissioners, you were not here when some of those things happened. And so this seemed like a good opportunity to do some level setting here for all of you. We want to discuss some of those investments that were made, and then I'll give you a little preview of what's coming. We can go to the next slide, Dan. So as you referenced, Madam Chair, the American Rescue Plan was signed into law on March 11, 2021. I will say that our story for the work when it comes to how we were responding to the pandemic really stem way back to March 27th of 2020, when the first round of relief funds came in the form of the CARES Act. And during that time, we were obviously a county trying to manage through a very significant pandemic while you're actually, part of the public health department obviously played a huge role. They're going to be with us this afternoon to talk a little bit about their work through the pandemic. But I wanted to especially just say that moving this type of relief dollars through the county was an extreme lift for our staff and for our community. It would be remiss to just, only focus on Ramsey County, but we really relied both through the CARES Act efforts and also through the ARPA efforts on the tremendous number of community-based organizations that partnered with us to deliver services. So, you know, to both staff and to community, we owe a significant amount of gratitude for the work that's happened. So back to the American Rescue Plan Act, it happened, obviously was signed into law on March 11th, 2021. On April 20th, 2021, County Manager Ryan O'Connor and CFO Kutz at the time came to the board with a high-level overview of the dollars. And then from that point on, we started to kind of execute against the funds. The other really unique thing I want to call out about these dollars is that they were direct, how important it was for local entities like counties to receive these funds directly. It's a little bit unusual that they didn't go through a state. Some CARES Act money ended up coming through the state eventually, but for these ARPA dollars to really come to counties was a particularly unique and very powerful opportunity for us to localize solutions for our community. And that needs to be said, because that's not really the typical way that a lot of federal funds come to counties, and that's really important. So as you go to NACO and talk about, you know, the challenges of managing you know, the needs of our community, to continue to lift up the opportunity for the counties to dictate some of that work more quickly without having to go through another layer of state government, I think has a lot of validity for how we were able to execute. So if you want to go to the next slide, Dana, this is going to be my last slide, and I'm going to turn it over to Deputy County Manager Kutza. But the American Rescue Plan Act actually had a lot of parts. What we're going to talk about is actually the bottom, which is the state and local recovery fund. That was $350 billion that was distributed to counties around the country. In addition, that bill actually had lots of other things. You might remember the individual impact payments that actually were checks cut to individuals during that time. There also was the child care tax credit. There were a lot of capital projects. We've seen a lot of things come out on broadband throughout the country, homeowner insurance, homeowner assistance, emergency rental assistance. So today, you know, the American Rescue Plan included a lot of things. We are going to focus on the state and local recovery funds, which were unique in that they came directly to the county as an allocation. So I'm going to turn that over to our Deputy County Manager.
Thank you, County Manager Becker and Commissioner. I'm actually here today in my role. I was the Chief Financial Officer at the time, and I've been here. Luckily, I started in the county on March 2nd of 2020. So I got to go through the CARES pieces and the ARPA dollars. And, you know, I think some of you who are here, I did talk to the board quite a bit that there's always opportunity in crisis. And I think Ramsey County has done a particularly good job of making an opportunity out of something that was very hard for our community and the funds that came into our organization. So the CARES Act money that County Manager Becker mentioned was 1 year, and spending $100 million in 1 year is not easy. And there were needs, but I will tell you that was a push. When we got to the ARPA, which is where I'm turning now, the time frame was much longer, which changed how we behaved about the money and how we did thoughtfully invest in our community. So as was mentioned, it was a $350 billion item that went to the state and local governments. And so many of us, including St. Paul, Hennepin, we got funding based on a formula that they did of how many people live in Ramsey County. We received $108 million, and we received that in 2 payments. As she said, it came early. It came right away in 21 and then again in 2022 in May of each year. So that money, how the bill was written, how it was designed, is that it had to be obligated by December 31st, 2024 and spent by December 31st, 2026. So we're still in that time frame. What we did in that April meeting was really talk about, in April of 2021, the county manager, O'Connor at the time, he talked about how are we going to invest this money? And we're going to get to that at the next slide, but the tier 1, it was really thinking about what is the emergency, what is happening today, what's the public health response that we need to address, and the economic downturn. At that point, the economy had turned and we were not in a great space from an economic standpoint. And then it was, this is kind of generation changing money, and how do we leverage that to change how we do our business for the longer term? And so we actually took time to review and plan for how we wanted to spend the money with the longer term time frame. We spent 21 and 22 coming to the board in various, like the earlier pieces, tier 1 pieces came early. And then as we rolled out the other the workforce pieces, the housing pieces, the affordable housing pieces, and the alternative response pieces, they came later because we spent time actually thinking about what were we gonna do? What was the time frame? What was the ongoing, like, how do we support that work ongoing and the trajectory of that work? Then we did work we've done work. Lots of people in this room and elsewhere across the county and our community partners have been doing this work since then. Just late last year in 2024, we did bring forward to the board an action that took all the remaining funds and shifted it from the ARPA initiatives into projects. Treasury has been a great partner and challenging in that many of the requirements of the dollars shifted over time, which if you know anything about finance and people in finance, we don't like that. We like to know the rules and follow the rules. So when the rules change, it becomes hard for us to make sure we're doing what we need to do. I do want to take a minute to think, we have been meeting, the first year we met every week, but regularly with a group from the county attorney's office, from the compliance office, and from the operational supports team, which Kim Hansen is here from today. We have met all the time to try and figure out, are we in compliance? What things are changing? How do we make sure, what my county attorney friends would say, paper the file, so that we make sure we have documentation on what we're doing, so that anyone would come back and say, did you spend that money in alignment with the Treasury guidance at the time? We can say absolutely yes. And show how what we're doing has an impact and how it's actually doing what the board approved that we should be doing. So we came to the board in late 2024 to do what I think of as a swap. We basically spent the money in terms of what the Treasury requires for spending. And so at the end of 2024, that into that obligation period, they actually see us as fully spent versus obligated. Except for the deeply affordable housing, which I'll mention in just a second. At that same time, we moved that money into projects with the same scope, intent, and time frame of the ARPA dollars. So from your perspective, it was just a matter of how we're paying it and how we're reporting to Treasury. It actually didn't change anything about what we were doing with the ARPA funds. It just simply honestly protected us a little bit from changes at Treasury to make sure that we finish the investments that we committed to, both as an organization and to our community. There is one project, the Deeply Affordable Housing ARPA program, that remains a Treasury reported item and is being spent and reported back to Treasury. I think the $19 million is down to a smaller number that Ms. Hansen can confirm later as needed.
Alex, I'd like to also just mention that other jurisdictions, including City of St. Paul, did a similar thing last year as well. So
Commissioner Shaw?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question about the 19 million for that, but all of that has been allocated already, right? It
That's
just
right.
hasn't been spent.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's been obligated, and she just mentioned to me it's down to 8 million. We
Okay.
must have had a project go through.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Are you able to share what has been obligated, where, to do what? The 8 million that's remaining?
I'd be happy to follow up on that.
Okay.
Mhm. Okay, so this is how we thought about it. We borrowed this actually from the City of St. Paul. It didn't come from them originally, but how do we think about this funding and in what tiers? So if you look at this from the bottom up, the tier 1 was people in need. What is immediately needed? So you'd see a lot of that money going into the public health areas. And then you look at emergency budget stabilization and prioritize budget amendments. I want to talk about that for a minute, because the one piece that you are not going to hear about in all these all the presentations over the next 2 weeks is the $20.1 million for budget stabilization. So what we did in 2021, when I came in, we took the levy down to 0% because of the economic downturn and where we were as a community. Then in 22 and 23, we leveraged this money for what I called like more of a soft landing or to smooth the cliff. And we used 15 million in 2022 to offset the levy and 5 million in 2023 to offset the levy. And then in 2024, there are no ARPA funds remaining that support the levy of Ramsey County. we did that because the increase to the tax levy was too much for our community to bear at the time.
Mhm.
Yet we had real high service needs and was not a time to be looking at reducing our budget. And so we leveraged that money. We were able to use it. It's called revenue replacement, was one of the categories you could use for ARPA dollars. And we used it as revenue replacement, saying that our revenue was not coming in the same as it would have if COVID hadn't happened. And we leveraged $20.1 million. We were kind of unique in that. I had a lot of CFOs across the state being like, wait, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? I actually think it worked very well for us. It helped us keep the levy to a reasonable percentage over those critical years and kind of gave us a couple of years to plan and get that money out of the budget so we could be sustainable going forward. Let's see. I think you're gonna hear about all of these. If you go to the next slide, it's much more detailed. I just want to put this up here as kind of a reference point, so that you had where the money went. Some of these have been adjusted slightly, but all of these align with those tiers, tier 1, 2, 3, that one I just talked about, 4 and 5. And so really, you're gonna hear about pretty much every single one of these through this week and next week. And we have stayed true to that when I think about the investments we made and how people are reporting back on all of this work through the regular reports we get. It is truly about first, stabilizing people in need, then the budget and investment. And then how do we actually change what we're doing? The investments in deeply affordable housing, workforce, and violence prevention have changed how we do business. So I think it's been fairly successful that those major investments, the majority of the money going there, helped us really think about how this changes generationally what we do here. And it was an opportunity that you don't get very often, even in a crisis. I think that is all for my part, unless you had any questions.
Are there any other questions? Commissioner John?
Do you have like a column, that you are able to add about like what's been spent or if it's already been spent already too?
Absolutely. We provide that monthly pretty much, and I'm happy to send it to you after this meeting.
Right, thank you.
Did you send it to all of us?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Now, remember, when I send that, I want to be clear, the spending is against the project and not against what Treasury. If Treasury believes it's fully spent on all of those, except for, not that they believe that, it is fully spent. We spent it on completely legitimate aligned items. It's just that in terms of what your report is seeing, it's seeing what we spent during ARPA and then what we spend in the project. And that's how we present it, because those projects remain the same.
Okay. Madam Chair, may I ask one more
Yes, please.
question? So if there were any shifts or anything, that would still require board action. And then it would
Absolutely.
have to go back to the Treasury for.
It
Oh,
it would
what-
not have to go back to the Treasury.
Oh,
It would just have to come to the
Okay.
board to
Okay.
change. So how we created the projects was that it had to follow the original intent, and any change to that intent or use of the money would come back to the board. And we put a date of 12/31/26 on it so that we kept the same time frame. Now, there may be a point where we want to, or you want to as a board, the organization comes back and says, hey, could we get 6 more months on this to spend that money? That is up to you, but we kept the original time frame because that is what we had said we were going to do, and that is what the board approved.
And
Yeah,
And that's a requirement that the board made, like a policy that the board made. What is the federal requirement in this case, or is everything? clear?
Madam Chair, Commissioner, there is no more federal requirement for that. Originally, it did align with the federal requirement to be fully spent by 12/31/2026. And we wanted to stay true to that. I do think there's some positive things about that. This is work that we intended to be in that timeframe, but clearly the board can make a different decision based on any recommendations.
Okay, great, thank you.
Commissioner Moran?
So kind of like, I'm hearing it allows the county to have some flexibility.
Absolutely.
And what I'm also hearing predominantly too, it allows consistency. So that you're working from the requirements of the time rather than shifting requirements.
Exactly. And Madam Chair, Commissioners, it allows consistency and flexibility and protects us from any, like, oh, they might want to,
Come
if the
to
federal
back.
government changed their mind about how they wanted to use that money, we are fully spent.
Yeah.
Outside of that.
Because they could come back and say, no, we need that money back.
Mhm.
There we go. Well, thank you. Alex. We're talking about this, there's a lot about money and how we decided to spend it, but there's a lot of the learning that we had along the way, right? That in as, you see, what, do you see, Alex, as Alex was saying, like, there's both are, with ARPA, we have this longer time frame, right? To think about what we wanted to spend on, a greater opportunity for thinking about long-term investments versus in CARES. Not only was it like a ton of money that came super fast, I think about this like fire hose of money and having to get it out the door. But if you think about where we all were as individuals and as an organization at that time period, it was such a huge time of uncertainty and just not knowing so many things, right? And so this ARPA was just so much different, that where it had this opportunity to breathe and like, where do we want to invest this? And so just taking a moment to think about how do we bridge that time with CARES and what we did learn along the way and how it informed our investments and how it's changing us or changed us as an organization going forward. And so during CARES and leading up to ARPA, we really had three main areas of learning that we documented. And first is this, our individual experiences of being people living in Ramsey County, people living through a pandemic, working for the county, working for different organizations, right? And how we as individuals learned maybe how we could do things differently or how our lives changed and all that personal learning and how we're doing our own work differently. But also we had an organized evaluation of CARES. It's on our website. It was like 300 pages long. And then there's also the Equity Action Circle. And so each of these could, and some of them already have had entire board workshops about the learnings that we had in the in-depth here, but this is just a really high level kind of to give you space when you're thinking about and watching the board workshops this afternoon and next week. Here are some high level touch points that you're going to hear throughout, and I think are reflected in how we do our business now. The Equity Action Circle was a group of 15 community leaders who came together with county staff, and their charge was really to ensure that race and health equity and community engagement were part of the county's COVID-19 response. And so as we're spending that CARES dollars, how are we co-designing and co-thinking with community and ensuring we're meeting community needs? And this group had a report that came out in October 2020 that had these strategies that were co-developed with county staff and community for how to address the needs of particularly racial and ethnically diverse residents. And they made a lot of recommendations, right? And many of them were related to the immediate need. How to get vaccine information, how to get testing information out to certain communities, what we need from your staff today, right? And then there were some longer term recommendations that led to some changes in how we do our business, and I'll touch on in a moment. The CARES evaluation looked at 9 projects, and we had a lot more projects than that, but these were prioritized because they were identified as either furthering the county's strategic priorities and having some applicability beyond the pandemic. Like this wasn't just specifically to now. Enabling the county to be accountable to its residents and community on these big profile projects. And then as part of a coordinated effort to reduce or mitigate racial and ethnic disparities in COVID-19 outcomes. And really it looked at 3 really broad questions, all related to, are residents better off? Did we do what the community was asking, or were we responsive to community in that? And how can we better attract, retain, and support our community partners? And so when we're looking at those 3 things, our individual experience, the CARES evaluation, and the Equity Action Circle, these are kind of what the big learnings really came down to. And so, the holistic approach to community need, which is now one of our strategic priorities in, advancing a holistic approach to families. A lot of the navigator thinking was coming out of here, like the need to have a staff person who could answer a broad array of questions and not just particular to a program or a department. Building on and supporting existing community organizations and services, and not the county creating a whole bunch of temporary new programs, right? And this is something that the EAC, you see that again and again and again in their documentation of invest in our organizations, in our communities for the long term. We know the work, and it's bringing the economic you know, resiliency in the community when we invest, right? And I think about, from the evaluation standpoint, one of the things we were evaluating was the food distribution. And when that program was first being stood up, like, how do we get, 40,000 meals out, weekly to all these people who can't leave their houses or homebound? How do we even do this? And there's all these discussions, right? And we're like, well, we need a commercial kitchen. How do we get a commercial kitchen? We should buy one. And then someone was like, well, wait a minute. There's all these restaurants all over the place that already have commercial kitchens and really need the cash right now. So should we be having, contracts with them to do this? And the time really felt like oh, wow, this is a brilliant idea. But really it's kind of well, duh, and so, but I think that sort of changed how we think about, right? And where do we invest and where does the county's role in that? Sharing information through trusted community channels. And so, the Trusted Messenger was one of the programs that was evaluated, but also came out of some of the EAC thinking, and how do we get that information out? Not only before, I think sometimes we get in that site where we put it on another language on our website. That's what we need to do, right? Versus the many, many ways that there are to communicate, and that different communities receive information and understand information and trust that information. We also learn that we can, when we need to, we can move quickly. Which sometimes in a bureaucracy, you feel like everything's inching along, but there's many examples of how, procurement and contracting and how they learned. And there's a really clear documented example of how we changed our processes in response. And then finally, the importance of having relationships before you need them. And that word about need, right? It has that sort of extractive nature to it. And so how do we have these relationships with communities, partners of all different sorts that are reciprocal, and we're all getting our needs met, versus oh my goodness, everything's falling apart. I need to know what you need to know now. How do we have that relationship? So when we do call or they call us, we have that relationship first. And so those are some of the major learnings.
I would just like to say on that point, so I was a provider during this time who sat in a lot of these different conversations, I think specifically around food distribution and need. And one of the things that I think I'm really encouraged by is the idea of the county breaking out of different service silos. And that community providers work in collaborative spaces as their normal mode of operation. And for us to be leveraging those spaces and how we can contribute and strengthen and buoy those spaces. And in a small way, I'll just say, I was part of a local nonprofit group in the Northeast Metro that met just as professional groups do. But because we were meeting regularly for years beforehand, when COVID hit, we instantly went from a quarterly meeting to a weekly Zoom meeting, and it was who's got PPE and who's figured out what this thing is and because we already had those relationships and trusted that the community's needs was everybody's intent for being in that space and sharing. And so the idea of how one of the things I'm really curious and will continue to ask through these coming workshops is, how are we leveraging the collaboratives that we already support? We have a number of them that we participate in. And how are we recognizing that the very capacity building of our ecosystem of networks is itself its own value, along with whatever particular mission and program directive of those collaboratives are, and how we can imagine, whether it's transitioning from a COVID response to an opioid response to who knows what's coming next response, that in and of itself has value. And I love that you're bringing this up.
Thank you, Chair Jevin Singh. That's exactly. And I also don't want to imply that we're doing all this perfectly. It continues to be a learning journey, right? And so these are areas where we've definitely had some growth.
I think with the speed comment too, I think it's important to note, and I'm trying to recollect the time frame, but the board declared an emergency, as a state of emergency during the pandemic. And that lifted some of our practices that are normally can bog us down, right? So there was an evolution during
Mhm.
2020 through part of, I don't know, I mean, we'd have to probably look when some of those got lifted, but you can even still see like in the work with our backlogs we talked about this morning, there's still some ripple effects of like waivers and things being changed. So like how government was kind of doing its work throughout this time from March of 2020 until today continues to sort of impact all of us in a lot of different ways, if that makes sense. And so I think that was important to note, because sometimes people remember back to like 2022 and how come you didn't have to jump through those couple of procurement hoops? Well, we actually didn't have to back then, where there was a emergency purchase order process that under an emergency, we didn't have to quite slow ourselves down so much. And so there was a change, and it's important to know. So yeah.
In that, as we look back at the learnings of what we were able to do and do differently during COVID and be able to apply that. I understand that when those emergency orders lifted, some of the typical checks and balances and timeframes were reestablished. As part of these reviews, is there anything as far as going forward of what's in our control?
Yeah.
And I recognize not everything is, but of what's in our control, are we able to adopt more nimble practices going forward?
Absolutely, Chair.
I think there's a lot of those in fact.
Yeah,
That we used a lot of that in the purchasing and contracting transformation. We leveraged a lot of what we learned during COVID and CARES in particular. Some of it, to your point, we can't do. There are laws that prevent us, but most of it we could. And we've implemented a lot of changes, including one thing I want to highlight is the support for our contractors in the community. So during CARES and then into ARPA, we established a team that part of their job was to make sure that our community partners and vendors knew how to submit an invoice. They would call them to support them. They would answer questions. We have one line you can call, one email you can contact to get to us. And that has remained, that kind of support for different areas in the county were doing it. Like workforce had quite a bit of that. Public health had some of that, but it wasn't consistent. And we needed it to be consistent. And if you had one contract with workforce and one contract somewhere in human services, you may not have had the same experience. And so we're not 100% there, but we've done a lot to incorporate that. And I know Dana has other examples that have been used. That's just one I know because I worked on it.
yeah, absolutely. But finally, when we think about those community partnership impacts and the EAC and kind of what we learned from that and from that time period, these are some really clear ways that you'll hear about that these, show up in our work. And as Alex was just saying, the experiences of procurement and contracting at the time during the pandemic and the evaluation there and other work done really resulted in procurement and contracting transformation and it's just a sea change in how we do our work on that area. I was laughing the other day about one of the things, you forget how different things were. And like, we used to have to come to the board chambers to open bids in person, like as late as February 2020, right? And so when you think about that, like opening bids you had to do it in person. And so just thinking about how transformational some of these things were from where we were. That holistic view of the family and of communities really resulted in our investment in family coaching services, which are now being provided through 3 community agencies, serving more than 100 families at a time and helping them develop their executive coaching, executive functioning skills and plan for their own achievement of their own dreams, right? Their own goals that need to get that critical health information out and have it be understood and trusted. We still have trusted messenger programs today. And, the way the communications works with different communities has also changed as a result of that. And then many of the workforce recommendations led to the public health career pathways program and that development. And so as you're hearing about those over the next couple board workshops, just be thinking about that like seed that was first grown during CARES and how that changed us as an organization.
Commissioner Johnson?
One of the things I have as we have learned so much, right, like during the time together, And then just also seeing like big transitions within the county, right?
Mhm.
In terms of like leadership and staff. How are we ensuring that, we create the system that it remains intact after this funding?
That's a really solid. Chair and Commissioner, I know Ling and Alex certainly have answers to this, but it's how are we, the documentation we're having, right? And how do we lay that foundation so it's not, we don't just let that go. I think some of the three of us here are a testament to that in some respects, where we are all in different positions during this time period. But yet, how do we continue to hand that to the people who are following in those roles now?
I would just say from my perspective, I think, some of the work that we led through, actually did go fairly deep into the culture of
Mhm.
the organization. I'm super proud of the work that we did in workforce, and we have a couple of our planners here, Christy and Rachel. I think they would say there's no way they do work the same today in that department as they did pre-2020. And so I think part of it is trying to think of, as you see the leaders that come before you in the next, 4 days, we have pretty significant departments that have kind of filtered this work deeper down. There's no way you could move $108 million without a lot of staff helping, honestly, is probably the best answer. And so many people touched ARPA in so many ways. And I do think we had a very strategic direction around removing barriers, making sure we were investing in community, engaging partners. Like those were just very clear. And that all comes from all of you. I mean, really the strategic priorities and the vision, mission, goals of the organization, they drive all this. I mean, I remember the day with the CARES Act funding, I was sitting at home during 2020 and my phone rang, and I think it was Alex actually who said, can you work on a $15 million plan after Monday and tell us how you would spend it? You know what I mean? And how many organizations would you as a director kind of even start to frame that? But it's because the vision, mission, and goals and the strategic priorities are so driven down that it was clear what to bring forward to the board. And I think that kind of leadership, and then you pair that with directors that are empowered to do that work, you can start to do that change within. And I think it got to be a safe place. I'll just say this to like, when we were working with the finance department, when we were working with communications or different people, as program leaders, we felt like we could push and ask questions, and it was a collegial, welcome thing. There was nobody saying, we don't want to change. We don't want to get better. And I think I hope that makes you believe that deeper in the organization, we have a lot of folks that care about the systems change. I mean, I personally believe that that's there. So I don't know if you have any more to add, but.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, the mission, vision, and values of this organization helped us not go off course, right? That we knew what our foundation was and we just moved forward with that. I would also say there's a fair amount of documentation.
Yeah.
I know I kind of joked previously about
There's a lot.
papering the file, but it's beyond just having documents of what did we pay. It is really about if you talk to the leads of these projects, like what are you doing? Where are you investing? How is it furthering the work that we're trying to do? Like it is well documented how we have invested this money and some of the things that didn't quite work along the way and why. And then, we had some starts and stops, and then those are probably more documented than almost anything we've done. Because Treasury required a lot of documentation, and because we were trying to evaluate what we did, because in those tiers 4 and 5 in particular, we were trying to operationalize this and test out, is this a different way we should be doing business, and using this money to really jumpstart thinking about how we might take the opportunity to think about that. So we wanted to make sure we were evaluating it. And that's what you see some of this work changing, like the PACT. I would imagine that Division Director Dolly Lee doesn't understand that much of that came from ARPA dollars because she was hired later and she's just doing it. That's her job.
And last thing I'll say is I think community expects different from us. They were partners all along the way. There is no way that their expectations have not changed in the way they expect our organization to work with them, in partnership with them, how we treat them, in terms of like creating really most of our work to be non-transactional and really relational. Everything from contract management to evaluation to the way we support and even come up with ideas. I just think it's changed. for the good in a lot of ways. So, yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, Commissioner Moran?
Um. I'm trying to be on a positive. But no, so it's good to like really hear that COVID allowed Ramsey County to think different, to build stronger coalitions and partnerships and engage the community. And to learn how to move forward with all the cumbersome pieces that is within government, right? But I also heard Commissioner Zone say that how do we transfer that information, right? And so I look at like maybe over the last 6 months where we've had a lot of transitions, right? And people have left who's been in positions of authority. And sometimes I don't always see that transfer of knowledge and information passed down, right? So there's lack of, those next steps. And so one of the things that as I was sitting here just listening is just like thinking about like when a person leaves Ramsey County, and I don't know if we do exit interviews, right? Or be very intentional about those exit interviews to ask them, is there a project that you're working on that needs to be a follow-up? Is there some key things, right? Because I think there's sometimes are gaps in that, and information and knowledge and support is lost because that person left. And I just think it'd be helpful to think about that, how we do those transitions. I think someone is leaving who's in a position, they leave for all of that and they take it to wherever they're going, but that leaves a gaps here. So just thinking about how do we do that and do that intentional before people move on.
Yeah, thank you. Commissioner Ortega?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to add that for the board, when we have our board retreat, number one, you reaffirm the mission, vision, and so forth. You make changes as you see fit. It's a living work, right? So I just want to encourage you that that's the opportunity where you revisit all of this. Because it really has to come from the top down, right? In terms of the vision, the mission, and so forth. You are the elected officials. And so as you engage with your communities and so forth, we still got a lot to work. As great as we've done community engagement, there were a lot of communities of colors that did not want to do business with Ramsey County or any government because they don't trust us. I chaired the food security, and I could tell you, I talked to a lot of communities of color folks, businesses and so forth, and they didn't want to do business with us. And they said, it's too messy. I don't want to get involved. Those are some of the things. While they might be true in white communities, they're not necessarily true in. So these are the kind of things that I think we just revisit every year and make sure that we're on the track that the board wants to be.
Okay, so finally, before I hand it back to County Manager Becker, we have what we're calling our one-time gap needs. And so these are things, we had a lot of gaps because of COVID and that economic downturn and challenges. And it was like, here's the things we need to just fill in those gaps, right? So the sheriff's office, the county attorney had a court case backlog related to the courts there, but the sheriff's office received $600,000 to assist in the security there. So the escorting people to and from court, the having the witness, victim witness advocates and court staff there, ensuring safety of everyone involved, right? So there's some funds there. Our information services department received $3 million that was used mainly for hardware replacement and some software. This was not in addition to their they have an annual replacement budget, right? This was not in addition to that, it replaced it necessarily for $1.5 million each year. It was lowered by that amount, the amount that departments have to pay, if that makes sense. So everyone pays a fee to IS for all the wonderful services they provide for us, right? So that resulted in departments having to pay less for that replacement of hardware. Social services and its men's choices area, aging and disability, was given $1.1 million that created 18 limited duration positions over 2 years that were able to complete just over 2,000 men's choices assessments, so helping them get caught up from where they were. Financial assistance services received $1.2 million for a very similar to help them get out of their backlog. And so they had 16 limited duration staff positions that were, their clerical was supported financial workers during that time.
Can I
And
add one?
yeah,
Madam Chair, Commissioners. For both of those, I think the human services programs tend to lag the economy.
Yep.
And so what you saw here was we had the economic downturn, and then shortly after you saw a lot of people coming into these programs, and it lagged a little, and then we saw, oh, wow, there's like our increases in applications coming in and people coming through our door is really high, and it'll continue beyond. It continues beyond the economic recovery, right? It lags on both sides. We saw this at the state and you see it here. And so that's where we said, oh, we need to do something here because we didn't anticipate that in the beginning of how that would impact our programs.
absolutely.
Commissioner Kelly?
Can I ask a question? So if those were limited duration positions, is that why we're seeing the backlog now, or started seeing it within those positions end and that contributed towards it, or is it just a combination of things?
Chair, Commissioner Miller, it's a combination of things. It's not like we had these positions and now they're gone and that's why it's going up. I mean, this is a whole ecosystem of things that are happening, right? I mean, there's our staffing needs, right? But you have, and for men's choices, there just are more and more people who are entering that age group, right? Who need long-term care, as well as a growing disability, people with a variety of disabilities in our community. And maybe some of that's related to COVID, right? And so there's more demand, as well as all the regular things we hear about, like aging state systems and the challenges that those cause. For financial assistance, earlier we talked about those waivers.
It's the lifting of the waivers.
Yeah.
Waivers, okay.
So yeah, it's that whole variety
It's
of
this
things.
combination,
Yep.
thank you.
Yeah,
Like
and
the
these were
perfect
gap
storm.
fillers that didn't completely fill the gap.
Okay.
And then we have only had 3 that were related to our own employees. During, I forget the exact time period, I didn't look at the months, but for a while there was the vaccination requirement that you had to submit proof that you were vaccinated, and if you did not want to get vaccinated, you had to submit weekly negative COVID tests. Well, that infrastructure cost money to build that, right? So there's that. Staff received a $500 stipend to purchase equipment for their home office or their home work at home needs. And then finally, there were one-time lump sum recognition payments to staff of $1,000 for people who worked on site throughout the pandemic, and $500 for other staff. And so that kind of rounds out those one-time gap.
Yeah, so in terms of trying to do this kind of $108 million accounting, if you want to go to the next slide here. We want to make sure we covered those one-offs today, this morning. And then this afternoon, you're gonna hear about housing stability, about, that department didn't even exist during that time. Like that was one of the, maybe I'm giving their punchline, but this is the big thing that we worked on, obviously, is housing stability. We're also gonna talk about the public health response, as a result of the pandemic. And then next week, we're gonna talk about workforce and the affordable housing. The goal is really to do kind of this high level overview. I've asked the teams to share kind of how they spent the money, what their impacts are, and really focus on the things that transform their work. Because at the end of the day, we don't have an extra $108 million for the next couple of years, but it really fundamentally, did have impacts on the way we do business. And so that's what we want to capture and hold on to. The appropriate response initiative was also a significant tier investment. We're going to cover that. We're going to have a whole series of strategic priority workshops coming up as we move into later spring, especially when we get our last commissioner seated. I wanted to hold off on some of those workshops until that happened. And so the ARI project will come as part of the justice transformation session on that strategic priority. So yeah, so this morning was just to kind of get your frame, mind around kind of what the purpose of the money was, how it was flowing, what we how we managed it, and then we're gonna get more into the programmatic details, the next 3 workshops.
Do we have any further questions or discussion? Commissioner Moran?
Um,
I do this one.
so, I'm looking at the one-time gaps. I'm just, I want to just recognize and celebrate and validate the one-time lump sum recognition payment that you gave to staff. I think that's really important to do some recognition to staff, you know, especially as we see like the fast workers who have been overburdened and everyone is coming down on him to find other ways to recognize them and give them some recognition that values them being there. So I just wanted to say, kudos to that. Let's think about continuing to look at what that needs to look like. Because sometimes people can, you know, show up and maybe even get paid less if there's other perks. Right, and so, I think that's something to think about. And I know we do high-level overviews. And I try not to get into the weeds, but I can't help myself sometimes. And so, you know, looking at the impacts and things learned that has transformed our work. But I would also like to know what is not working, you know, what is challenging, right? I think that's important too, that we are able to hear those things, right? Because everything is not beautiful. And we know that as soon as we step out this building, right? And so I think that'll be helpful to hear that and know that.
Commissioner Miller?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a couple comments. As a former service provider who worked with the county prior to COVID and during COVID, I want to say thank you guys for the work that you guys have done to change that relationship with community partners, to change how the way you do contracting, just to change how the way you interact with community, because before it was very, forget that, right? Like, I don't want to work with the county. Are you kidding me? And now it's more of, let's do this work together. And our organization actually was one of the trusted messengers in the very beginning. And through our food shelf work, we were able to get culturally specific messaging out to our community members in a timely manner. So it was critical because we didn't know what was going on, and hearing it directly from you guys really helped assure our families that it's going to be okay, right? Like, let's not continue to panic. And so I just wanted to uplift you guys in the great work that you're doing, because community does see that.
Commissioner Shaw?
I just really appreciate the thoughtfulness and consideration for our ongoing conversations about this and just framing it for all of us. Even though I've heard this, you know, presented to me like, you know, quite a few times, but I think this just helps to reaffirm and help tell the story of how we got here. I just also want to echo that it is really truly transformative so far. When I was at the city, this was not the type of relationship that we had even with the county then, right? And in that crisis, when we were like, what are we going to do to support businesses? And Ramsey County came to the table along with the city and so many different partners in the community. Like, this is how we can help support, and this is how we can get the money out the door. So I think that's a testament to the hard work that folks did through COVID. And I don't know, I think 5 years, if we're like 5 years out here, I think our staff who are still here probably need some sort of special recognition, for like getting through.
Yeah, I will say COVID years were like dog years.
It's true.
So,
Yes.
all of that. I also want to lift up the idea of, I think having a reflective practice where we don't lose, the lessons learned as we continue to go forward is really important. And that it gets, as Commissioner Moran said, remembers to transfer that new cultural expectation, those new processes and ways of doing things as leadership shifts and changes. One of the opportunities of changes, though, is that if they come in during a moment of a shift in culture, that becomes their first introduction. That is the culture. It's not having to pull off cobwebs or you know, rote ways of doing it for decades because they're fresh and they walk in, this is the way we do things. This is the way we do things. So as long as we're continuing to have that approach as we onboard people. And then also the idea too of distrust within our communities, you know, we've come off of a very polarizing and continuing to polarize political timeframe. And for community members and all of us, any sense of distrust to government systems at large transfers to perceptions of how we are able to do business with our partners, with our community members, with a sense of honest engagement. And I think that we have an uphill battle. But if we, because there's just an environment of that we have to navigate in that's bigger than us, but to continue to hold ourselves accountable to the lessons that were learned during COVID on this relationship building, that co-design, that co-creation, and remind ourselves that we need not have a specific crisis to have clarity about our mission and how we should do business. So thank you for bringing this back into light for that. Yes. I'm sorry to-
I just wanted to, something Nina brought, first of all, let me just say as somebody who dealt with the food security and I also chair the safety area, the staff were awesome. That's the only way I could say it. They were really awesome. Very focused, very creative. I don't know what else to say, but it made our job, from my perspective as commissioner, really not as difficult as it sounds. But Rena brought up something and asked the question, you know, what is not working? And that to me are kind of the topics like at the board retreat we should talk about, because it's a good question and it's a hard question because you don't want to say, you know, we could have a group of people who are working their butts off, but not the results we wanted. We don't want to be negative, but maybe we could phrase it in a sense of we need to pick an area where we could improve it. How do we improve it, right? Because I think that gets to your point. But I just want to make sure that the board retreat is where you as a board talk among yourselves and just bounce your ideas on what you want to do, and it should be used in that way. Sometimes we get off the path and we bring micro issues to it rather than the big picture and where we want to go.
Right. Well, so just summing up, does anybody else have any greater discussion on this? Okay, so just summing up, thank you so much for bringing this introduction, and this will be an ongoing workshop so we get into some more of the nitty-gritties. To that point of encouraging these partnerships, transparency, the co-designing, the co-production of things. If there are community partners or community members or people within the county system who have particular questions or interests or parts to add to our discussions, a deeper dive on that, the topics that are coming up in our workshops are part of our public meeting. And if there are specific issues or topics that you would like us to have a deeper dive, don't hesitate. That's how we continue to make sure we co-design and bring those different voices to the table. So with all of that, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job.
All right.